5, 4, 3. Almost held up another 4. 2, 1. We are live. Coming to you live as Lichtman Live. Say what's up to the people, Dad.
You know, as Rosanna Dana from the late Gilda Radner, my favorite comedian, always said, there's always something. And there's certainly a lot going on right now. But we're going to talk about one of the most important events that's happening right before our eyes. And it doesn't involve, believe it or not, Musk, doesn't involve federal employees and federal agencies, but it involves the fate of the free world and
Whoa.
perhaps the end of the collective security that has kept the free world safe since the end of World War II.
That sounds pretty intense, Dad.
It's really intense.
Well, this is our
So,
this is our first episode, just you and me, in over a week now.
yeah, it's good to be with you, although I loved our guests.
Yes, our guests were great, but now the people can hear straight from Dr. Lichtman's mouth, and I'm not Dr. Lichtman, so that's you, Dad. Yeah, let's start with our.
Ready for quizzes.
Oh God, no more quizzes.
That's right. I won't have Froggy twang you.
Okay. Yeah, let's start
What I'm
with our.
talking about is on the international stage, with world security at stake, Trump is once again bending to his buddy Vladimir Putin, who he's called very smart, a stronger leader than Obama. He's brushed off Putin's murdering of his political rivals. Essentially, he looks at Putin as a model and, of course, subject, as always, to flattery. So once again, Trump is bending to Putin with much more profound implications this time and giving Putin virtually everything he wants with essentially nothing in return. This is supposedly the great deal maker, the great negotiator. This isn't the first time. Sam, do you remember the Helsinki summit of 2018?
I do actually, yes.
Yeah. When Trump humiliated himself in front of the world by saying, uh, I don't care what our intelligence agencies say, not only Obama's, but mine. I agree with Putin. He didn't interfere with the 2016 election, not only contrary to every intelligence, assessment, but contrary to what we all saw right before our eyes. Of course, Trump has said, don't believe what you see or hear, only believe what I tell you. And he tried to clean it up, but you can't change that kind of embarrassment. And he has kept that line. It's not like he really backed off and said, yeah, Russia did this terrible thing in 2016. Quite the opposite. Are you familiar with his uh, famous phone call with Vladimir Zelensky that got Trump impeached for the first time?
I am familiar with it. Yes, quid pro quo. That's the first time I learned that word.
Yes, very good. And what did he
Thanks.
want Zelensky to do in return for keeping the aid?
Find dirt on his political opponent Joe Biden and his crime, quote unquote, crime family.
Right. And that's what everybody thinks, but you're only half right.
Oh,
There was something much more important that he wanted Zelensky to do. Do you know what that was?
give me a second to think about it. Don't buzz me. There was something more important that he wanted Zelensky
Yes,
to do.
that people have really overlooked.
I know. I can't remember.
That was to validate the Russian propaganda line that it was really Ukraine, not Russia, that
Oh,
intervened in 2016 and intervened on behalf of Hillary Clinton. In other words,
right.
totally rewrite the history of the 2016 election. So what happened in 2018 in Trump bending over to Putin was not a singular event. It was part of Trump's essentially bending to Russian propaganda lines. And now, who do we have as director of national intelligence?
Tulsi Gabbard.
And what has she done with respect to the Russians? Yes, bend over like Trump, parroting Russian
Well,
propaganda.
let's not say bend over. Okay, that's a little.
I know that's a little a bad
Calm
analogy.
down, sir.
We'll erase that and just say
Bend the knee.
propagating Russian propaganda
Okay.
lines. Now, so what is Trump now doing? He is negotiating or having his people negotiate directly with the Russians. And who has he left out?
The Ukrainians.
The Ukrainians and the Europeans who are right there
Right, them
and most
too.
threatened by Putin. Moreover, it's as if Russia had no responsibility for the war against Ukraine. He even said Ukraine should never have let this happen. Hey, let's not rewrite history again. Who is the aggressor, Sam? Who are the invaders?
Russia and Vladimir Putin.
Russia. And not only that, they've committed horrible atrocities and war crimes in Ukraine. This would be like after Hitler invaded Poland for Franklin Roosevelt to sit down with only Hitler, without Poland, without France, without Germany, and essentially capitulate to Hitler's demands with respect to Poland. I don't like to use Hitler analogies. I'm not saying Trump's a Hitler, but I'm saying what he is doing would be directly analogous to FDR doing that after Hitler's invasion of Poland. So, what has Trump and his cronies essentially done? You don't have to make any concessions, Russia. We don't have to worry about the land you seized from Ukraine. We don't have to worry about Ukraine joining NATO. You don't have to worry about American peacekeepers uh, protecting the security of Ukraine if we get a ceasefire deal. It's all going to be on your terms, and we're essentially not going to do anything to stop you to go into Ukraine again. Why not? You had no provocation to go into Ukraine in the first place. And we're not going to do anything to stop you from going after our NATO allies and, as I said, destroying the collective security that has kept the West safe for 75 years. And this notion that Putin can just be this benevolent partner, we can get rid of the sanctions, have him join the G7 group of nations, have this wonderful relationship with him. It's utter nonsense. Putin, and it's patently clear to anyone who looks at all about what Putin is all about. Does he want to be just another benevolent partner of Western democracy, Sam?
No.
No, he wants to destroy and disrupt democracy. And maybe that puts him in sync with Trump, as we have talked about many times, and I'm going to talk about again. And he wants to recreate the Soviet empire. He doesn't want to be a democratic partner with the US and Canada and Australia and Germany and France. That's the farthest thing from his mind. And, he's flattering Trump, and Trump is playing right into his hands. But don't just take my word for it. Let's look at one of the world's foremost experts in Russia and Eastern Europe. This is a Brit, Nigel Gould Davies. He's the senior fellow for Eurasia and Russia at the incredibly prestigious International Institute for Strategic Studies in London and a former British ambassador to Belarus. He is about as qualified and as independent an observer as you possibly could find about what's going on between the US and Russia under Trump. And he minces no words. This is him, not me. Quote, this whole negotiation from the start seems to be very tilted in Russia's favor. And it's even a question whether it should be termed a negotiation at all, or in some sense, rather, a series of American capitulations. It's not really a negotiation. It's America caving in to Putin at the expense of Ukraine, at the expense of Europe, and ultimately at the expense of the United States. This is replicated. Remember, he calls himself the America First president, right, Sam? Do you know about the original America First movement? You know what it was all about when it started?
I think it was all about fascism around the Nazi takeover of Germany, right?
Exactly. As the Nazis began to be sweeping and taking over Europe, this is before Pearl Harbor, when we're not in the war, an America First movement arose. You know who the chief spokesperson was, the great American hero, Sam?
Yes, Charles Lindbergh.
Correct. And basically, he said we should never get involved in this war. It's white Christians against one another, and we don't want white Christians to be fighting one another. We got to save ourselves for when the heathen hordes from the east invade us, openly, explicitly racist. He also blamed the Jews, of course, for pushing America in the war. But the basic point of the isolationists, including Mr. Republican, you know who Mr. Republican was in 1940? The senator from Ohio, son of a president,
No,
Senator Taft.
uh, didn't know that.
Senator Taft said, hey, we can live with Nazi Germany controlling Europe. We can trade with them, we can have relations with them. I might prefer to see the Allies win, but in the end, it doesn't really matter. That's essentially a replication of that. Doesn't matter if Putin, comes to dominate Europe. Doesn't matter if he snuffs out democracies. We can live with him, we can trade with him, we can have relations with him. It is just as much of an incredibly dangerous illusion today as it was for Charles Lindbergh and Senator Taft prior to Pearl Harbor, when we finally got involved in combating the fascists. I have a few other things on my mind, Sam.
What's that?
Remember, we talked last time about an internal coup that doesn't have to involve violence, but can be internal, can be launched uh, within the country, essentially bloodlessly. And what was the example I gave from 1799?
I don't remember.
Napoleon.
Oh,
Napoleon exercising an internal coup, overcoming the French democracy and installing him something as a dictator. Well, Trump must have been listening to himself, to us, because you know what he just did this week, a couple of days ago?
no.
He channeled
Oh,
Napoleon.
right, right, right.
He said, a quote attributed to Napoleon, if he's saving the country, he can't be in violation of any law. Justification of Napoleon's dictatorship. I wasn't hoping that's what he'd take out of our show. And I'm not, I can't say he actually got that from our show, but it's pretty eerily coincidental, isn't it, Sam?
You think Trump's watching our show? I don't think so.
I don't think he personally is watching our show. I absolutely believe some of his aides are watching our show.
Eh,
We get those trolls, where are they coming from? Any rate, I can't prove any of this, but it's an interesting parallelism, and I'm not a big believer in coincidences. So let's look at the Napoleon dictatorship that he wants to model himself on. What did Napoleon do for the French people?
nothing.
Worse than nothing. He launched these horrible imperialistic wars, right? Which resulted to no end, no good end for the French, in the deaths. We don't know exactly, but historians estimate anywhere from 400,000 to 1 million French people dead as a result of what Napoleon did. Great model for an American president. Now, another thing on my mind, Trump and Musk claim to be the great advocates of free speech. But as we've talked about before, that only extends to speech that parrots their own biases and politics. They are fundamentally intolerant of any other kinds of speech, even speech which suggests that there is still lingering racial discrimination in America, which is supported overwhelmingly by the consensus of scholarship. You can't say that anymore in Trump world. Well, we may have seen the most egregious example of Musk and Trump stifling free speech. Are you familiar what Musk said about this 60 Minutes reporter who criticized him?
Yeah, he said like put him in jail or something, right?
Yeah, put him in jail for a long prison sentence just because this guy criticized Musk. He didn't even criticize him inaccurately. He quoted a former USAID director or official, who criticized Musk's and Trump's analysis of AID. And for that, you should be sentenced to a long prison term. And what authority does Musk have to sentence anyone to prison?
I don't know what authority he has at all. He just
That's my point. I
he's
was
this
on
floating
Cuomo
ghost.
the other night, and I made this point. There's a right way to cut government. That is, you first do the investigation. If you find examples of waste and fraud, you go to Congress and you get it rectified. Remember, Republicans control the Congress. Not as if they can't do this. Instead, Trump has done it in exactly the wrong way, giving all this authority to attack our government to a private citizen who's laden with conflicts of interest, who is not vetted, not approved by the Senate, not an official of any congressionally established department or agency. So I guess Musk thinks he can do anything he wants, right?
I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Even, throw people in prison for long terms for criticizing him. Trump channeling Napoleon and saying, he who saves the country can't be violating any law. That's not out of context. He has said similar things several times before, basically saying, as president, I can do anything I want. He said that at least twice, maybe more, before this channeling of Napoleon. Who is the only other president to say that, Sam?
Andrew Jackson.
No, more modern. Come on, it's obvious.
Nixon.
Nixon. But Nixon said it after he was out of office. He said it 3 years after he resigned, so it didn't mean anything. And he got an enormous backlash from both parties. And, what kind of backlash has Trump gotten from Republicans? Yep. Moreover, I think it was just today I saw it on CNN. They said only the president and the attorney general have the right to say what the laws mean. Huh? Wasn't there a third branch of government, Sam?
Last time I checked, yes.
Yeah, last time I read the Constitution, which I think Trump has never read.
No, of course not.
There were 9 articles or something.
I saw I saw this graphic online of Fox News in 2021 freaking out that Biden made like 5 or 9, whatever he made. He had made at the time like the most executive orders in modern history. And Fox News was freaking out, calling him a pseudo king. And now Trump essentially is governing from executive orders. And, of course, they don't say a thing.
Yeah, I'll get to that in one sec, but I want to reiterate Trump gets up and says only he and his attorney general, who does whatever he wants, can say what the law is. Essentially saying, I'm a dictator. I don't have to listen to the courts. We're going to wipe out every branch of government but the executive. And you may remember, Sam, when Trump appointed Gates as attorney general, what did I say about that?
It was a false flag or something.
It was a feint.
Yeah.
Gates was going to withdraw, and he was going to appoint someone like Pam Bondi, who's just as bad, but is easily confirmable. And now we're seeing there's no way Gates could have been worse, maybe more bombastic, but in terms of substance, could not be worse.
And
Already, it's a huge scandal in the Department of Justice. Huge. Do you know what that is?
no.
That the Attorney General ordered prosecutors, career prosecutors in the Southern District of New York to drop
Oh, right.
the indictment of Mayor Adams, not because of any weakness in the indictment, but for political reasons, because they wanted to hang something over Mayor Adams so he could uh, engage in helping Trump with his deportation. This resulted in mass resignations in the Southern District of New York, including the acting U.S. attorney, Daniel Sassoon, a Federalist Society member. You know what the Federalist Society is?
Stop asking me so many questions.
The big conservative legal organization that, essentially gave Trump all his conservative Supreme Court and other judicial nominees. Federalist Society member. She clerked for Antonin Scalia. Is Antonin Scalia a big liberal?
No.
Late. No, he was the leader of the conservative wing of the court when he was alive. And she scathed, not only did she resign, she scathed the Department of Justice, for politically interfering with prosecutorial decisions, which is exactly what Trump falsely said Joe Biden was doing. Trump is wonderful at projection, isn't he? And a whole host of other prosecutors, including other conservatives, including one who clerked for Brett Kavanaugh. Is he a big, crazy liberal?
What? You want me to answer this?
No,
Yes.
you don't.
Yes, he's a crazy conservative liberal.
Yeah, Brett Kavanaugh, Antonin Scalia, these are lunatic liberals, as Trump labels everyone who doesn't agree with him. This is a huge scandal. It's probably the most blatant political interference with prosecutional decisions that we've seen in the modern history of the country. And it's now before the judge. It's not clear, if the judge can reopen the prosecution, but he's holding a hearing tomorrow asking DOJ to justify what they're doing. So in less than a month, we've had some of the biggest scandals ever seen. Another huge scandal from DOJ is she shut down that part of the FBI that attempts to prevent foreign actors from meddling in our elections, saying, oh, we don't have the resources for this, but we got plenty of resources to reinvestigate, everyone involved in investigating Donald Trump. We can go back 5 years and do all this political stuff, but we can't protect our elections from foreign meddling.
I think this also proves your point that people say whatever the hell they want in confirmation hearings, and then once they get power, they can do and say whatever. I mean, Pam Bondi in her confirmation hearings, of course, said she wasn't going to be doing the bidding of the president. She worked for the American people, not the president. And like you said, in the first couple of weeks, she's already proved that to be a lie.
Yeah. Yeah. I've made this point over and over. It's one of the most important things. Listen to what they say in confirmation and give it zero credence, because as you say, once they're in office, to quote the late, not so great press secretary to Richard Nixon, it is now all inoperative.
But I have a question. So I totally agree with you, and we see this time and time again, probably on both sides of the aisle, where people say something in confirmation hearings and then do the exact opposite once they get power. But the thing is, all these senators use that as an excuse to vote for these people. Like I remember hearing, it was one of the more moderate women Republican senators, either Murkowski or Collins. She quotes them all in their hearings, and they say, well, they said this, they said that, they said this, and I trust them. But we all know that
Brett Kavanaugh is not going to overturn Roe versus Wade based on what he said in the hearing.
I know, but it's frustrating because us American people, we know that what they're saying is total BS, but then our senators use exactly what they're saying as reasons for supporting them.
We have a Yiddish term for that. It's a shander. It's a shame.
You're right. I want to ask you a little bit more about this whole U.S.-Russia summit, Trump's perspective in the Trump administration. Like, again, sometimes their logic just baffles me because I understand maybe I don't understand, but let's say I take it for the truth that they want to be more friendly with Russia, right?
Way beyond that, but okay.
Way beyond that. Okay, but let's take that, right?
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Why wouldn't they at least pretend like, they were bringing Ukraine to the table, or Europe? Like, they could pretend all that. They could make a show of it and then still capitulate to whatever Russia wants. Why are they doing it like this, where it's so blatantly obvious that they're playing right into Russia's hands?
Why does Trump so blatantly obvious say I'm going to be a dictator? I'm not going to obey the laws. I'm above the law. I can do anything I want. This is Trump. This is his whole life. He believes he can say anything, do anything that he wants, and face no consequences. And you and I have talked about this before. He's not wrong. He's never faced any consequences for anything that he's said
Yeah.
or done, except maybe one can argue his botching of the pandemic cost him the 2020 election, but he comes back and wins 4 years later.
I want to get your reaction to this quote that Trump said. I don't know when this was. Maybe today or within the last few days. He said about Zelensky and about Ukraine. He said, well, quote, well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it. 3 years. You should have never been there. You should have never started it. You should have made a deal. So essentially, he seems to be blaming Ukraine
for being invaded.
Yeah, for being invaded.
Explicitly, and saying, how could they have stopped the war, except turn their whole country over to Russia? Russia invaded them. I repeat that. Gratuitously, aggressively invaded them, committed horrific atrocities and war crimes. This is like blaming Poland for being invaded by Hitler, or blaming China for being invaded by Japan. It is not just inaccurate, it's horrific, because basically he's whitewashing aggression, war crimes, atrocity, basically giving Putin a green light. Do anything you want, and no problem for me. Same thing we saw with what's his name, Mohammed
bin Salman,
the head of Saudi Arabia. Hey, so he butchered an American resident who's a Washington Post columnist, cut up his body. Yeah, Saudi's too rich. We don't really care.
Yeah, and don't forget that Saudi Arabia is the one hosting these talks between the U.S. and Russia, too.
The irony is so rich here.
Yeah, that was the part that really started to concern me, is when I saw that that quote from Trump, because he's trying to rewrite history and spread his own propaganda to therefore, I think, capitulate. I think that's a huge red flag, that he's going to totally capitulate to Russia, and he's going to make up false narratives about why he's doing it.
Look, he still hasn't admitted he lost the 2020 election. Still making up false narratives, rewriting history. He's tried to rewrite the entire history of the January 6th insurrection as a day of love by a bunch of patriots. He has tried to rewrite history in so many fundamentally dangerous and inaccurate ways. And that's another hallmark of a dictatorship. That is, you write history not according to the facts or detailed analysis, interpretation, but you rewrite it according to your own political needs. Every dictatorship does that.
Yeah. Is that everything on your mind? I know you wanted to mention a lesser-known Supreme Court ruling that might be coming up soon.
Yes, I'm going to briefly mention this because I'd like to get to the questions. There is a Supreme Court appeal coming up. I don't know if they'll take it or not, but this had to do with the firing of, I think, a whistleblower watchdog who had a 5-year term, and under congressional legislation could only be fired for cause, and Trump just fired him summarily. And there's a 1935 Supreme Court decision which says, yes, Congress can set certain rules for the firing of officials. And so this official brought suit. He won in the district court. The Court of Appeals did not overturn it. And now Trump is appealing to the Supreme Court. And if the Supreme Court takes this and rules in favor of Trump, then there are no guardrails. They're all essentially down. Nothing Congress can do, nothing the courts can do to stop him.
Not
That
good.
may be hyperbole, that may be a little extreme, but certainly it would very much reduce the constraints on Trump, if not entirely remove them.
Not good. Did you
What's
freeze,
that?
Dad? I said not good.
Not good. There's a lot of things happening
Yeah.
that's not good, including now they're firing FAA people at a time when there's an unprecedented number of airline tragedies on Trump's watch. They abolished the Safety Advisory Board, and now they're firing FAA employees when they should be doing just the opposite. They also fired employees of the organization that protects our nuclear weapons, because they had no idea what they did. That's how ignorant, Musk and his cronies are. Now they're trying desperately to get them back.
All right, you ready to get us some questions, Dad?
I'm always ready.
First, some housekeeping stuff. We've got almost 1,700 people watching, but only 473 likes. Please do us a big favor. Click that like button. It helps the algorithm. Don't forget that members and donations get priority in questions. You can follow us both on social media. I think that's it. Did I forget anything?
Yes.
What?
Our poll.
Oh, God. Here we go.
I know you hate this, but Steve Bannon, of all people, has come out against Musk, calling him an illegal immigrant and a parasite. I don't care about that. What he did say, and I agree with him, is that Musk is running amok in our government, contrary to our history, traditions, and Constitution. I don't agree on anything with Steve Bannon, but I couldn't agree with him more. And so I'd like to do a poll in our brilliant audience. Should we bring on Steve Bannon to discuss what Elon Musk is doing?
I just want to.
Simple poll, yes or no?
I just want to state that I'm strongly against this. I am strongly against having Steve Bannon on. I think he's a despicable human who's done extreme damage to our country, and platforming him is for one agreement that most people agree about anyways is a complete waste of time.
I don't agree. I think we'll get a lot of attention. I think, to bring on someone contrary to what we've been saying is, let me finish, as opposed to those who simply basically parrot what we've been saying, would make for a dynamite show, to show that two people who basically agree on nothing can agree about the damage that Musk is doing. At any rate, let's take a poll. We both stated our positions. And by the way, who agrees with me?
My mom.
Your mom. You should always listen to your mom. All right, take the poll.
Should we have Steve Bannon on the show again?
I know you're against it, but don't bias them anymore. Just a simple yes or no.
All right. And I'm only doing this because you wanted to do this. That's the only reason I'm even putting this poll up.
Okay. Voice of the people, Vox Populi.
I think there is a lot of great shows, crazy shows we could put on. That doesn't mean we should do them just for the sake of clicks. That's
All
my
right,
perspective.
You made your position clear. I've made mine clear.
Okay.
Just let the voice of the people speak. And I have no idea what the result of the poll is going to be, and you don't either.
Correct. All right.
All right, questions.
Our first question is from Andrew Carlson. They say, Professor, how alarming was J.D. Vance's Munich speech when he claimed free speech and German far-right movements face greater risks than the protection of Western democracy?
I thought it was the most despicable speech I've heard from a major American leader since 1940.
Wow.
Similar things being said by high government officials like Mr. Republican, Senator Taft, who were apologists, basically, for fascism in Europe. And that's basically what J.D. Vance is selling. This is the same guy who basically said, lives abroad don't count nearly as much as American lives. I guess he's a Catholic convert. Is that right, Sam? Pretty
I
sure
don't
he's
know.
Catholic. Guess who repudiated him?
The Pope.
The Pope to get the Pope to go after you personally, you have to say something unbelievably egregious. And the Pope said, quite righteously, the value of human souls does not get diminished by concentric circles away from the center. How morally reprehensible can you be?
It was also one of the most hypocritical speeches I've ever heard. He's talking about free and fair elections and,
Yeah, free speech.
yeah. And meanwhile, he hasn't even acknowledged that Trump lost the 2020 election. So
Yeah.
it
And they're
was,
stifling free speech whenever they can. That
right.
doesn't agree with them.
Yeah,
The
it
only
was,
free speech they recognize is free speech which parrots their orthodoxy.
right. And of course, now, and you've got Pete Hegseth just running around Europe babbling on and saying random shit and then being like, oh, I didn't mean to say that. And it's maybe one of the worst foreign policy teams I've ever seen is Vance and Hegseth.
Yeah. And for different reasons.
Yeah.
Seth is just way over his head, totally unqualified, doesn't know anything. J.D. Vance is smart and sophisticated. He's more like, a snake. Hegseth is more like a unleashed bull just rampaging randomly. And by
Right.
the way, my view, you could have picked a name out of the phone book. I know we don't have phone books anymore, but you get my point. And they'd be a better Secretary of Defense than Pete Hegseth.
Our next question is from Count Brass. They say, if Ukraine announced it had acquired its own nukes, and let's say it was true, do you think Putin would back off, or do you think things would escalate?
I think Putin would back off. You know, Having nuclear weapons is a very powerful deterrent against aggression. I'm not advocating that Ukraine should acquire nuclear weapons, but I think that would very much change the equation with Russia if they were a nuclear armed nation. That's one of the things that protects North Korea, in the opposite way. It's why Iran is trying to acquire nuclear weapons, for example. It's one of the things that protects Israel, that they have nuclear weapons.
We just got a big donation that came in from CJ about the Steve Bannon debate. They say, I'm sorry, Sam. Bannon is already platformed. Ignoring this reality is a disservice. Monsters exist whether you like it or not. In the words of King Theoden, ride out and meet them from Lord of the Rings. Yeah, but my
Couldn't
dad's...
agree more.
What's that?
I couldn't agree more, but keep the donations coming no matter what your views are.
Yeah, but you're not talking about having him on to challenge him. You're talking about having him on to just agree about Elon Musk is a bad guy. I mean, that's not even an interesting
No,
take.
it's beyond just Elon Musk is a bad guy. It has to do with, as Bannon said, and I agree, his violating the Constitution, our history, our traditions, and that gives us a chance to reach out to an audience we wouldn't otherwise touch.
You want Steve Bannon's audience in this chat? I don't think you do.
Damn right I do.
I,
I want to reach out to everyone, whether they agree with me or not.
you're
Except
giving...
I'm tired of all these people claiming I'm wearing a wig. It's real.
Yeah,
Stop
you think Steve Bannon's
attacking me
audience...
for wearing a wig.
You think Steve Bannon's audience is going to come in here and just be polite and just hang
I
out?
can deal with it. I can deal with it. All right. How's our poll doing?
We've got 600 votes. Do you want to wait for more, or do you want
Let's
to hear?
wait for more. Yeah, let's
All right.
get a few more questions in.
Our next question. With Trump playing footsie with Vladimir Putin and turning our allies against us, do you think we're headed for World War III?
I'm not going to predict we're headed for World War III, but I am predicting that the collective security that's kept us safe since the end of World War II is going to be weakened, and that's going to increase the chances of democracy being undermined and perhaps even armed conflict beyond Ukraine and Europe.
Will you speak on Tom Homan, the guy who's leading ICE, who publicly is asking DOJ to prosecute AOC for informing her constituents of their rights. How does this hurt the people of America? It feels like intimidation and attempt to silence.
Gee, imagine the Trump
I don't. Are
administration
you familiar with that?
trying to silence people. It's instead of becoming the wild exception, which has been true throughout our history, it's now become the norm. Intimidation, silencing, proclaiming free speech, but squelching free speech, using law enforcement as a weapon against the American people. The closest analog that I can bring up historically would be the McCarthy era, when Joe McCarthy and similar extreme right wingers launched a concerted, destructive campaign against, supposedly against communists, but it basically was against anyone who, espoused liberal left wing views. And what people don't realize, it was also targeted against gays and lesbians. There's a whole wonderful book on this called Lavender Scare, which explains how in the 1950s, gays and lesbians were targeted by conservatives, and a lot of them lost their jobs and lost their livelihoods for no reason. The McCarthy era has been wildly discredited, but so far what's going on under Trump is much broader because it encompasses a much wider range of so-called enemies than anything we saw even in the McCarthy era.
This is from Toyota Corolla with the $19 donation. They say, there's a tuberculosis outbreak in Kansas and measles outbreak in Texas. And with RFK Jr. now head of Health and Human Services, with his history of anti-vax advocacy, how bad do you think his handling of a health crisis like this will be?
Oh, on a scale of 1 to 10, 9.9.
That's pretty high.
That's pretty high. Again, you could have picked a name out of the phone books. I mean, we still had phone books, and they'd be a better HHS secretary than RFK Jr. because they'd be less destructive. Remember, we talked about what happened in Samoa, with RFK going down there and promoting his anti-vax views. 86 kids died. And a tiny, tiny population that would project to hundreds of thousands of kids dying. We're seeing a measles outbreak in a small county in Texas. Why? Because vaccine rates are dropping. When vaccine rates drop, not when they're eliminated, but even if they drop a few percentage points, kids get sick and ultimately may even be in danger of dying. And instead of someone who would deal with this, we have not an anti-vax skeptic, an anti-vax cynic, and a purveyor of quack science. And that is incredibly dangerous to every American. They've already blacked out the kind of health information that would help us deal with the next pandemic. We are going to be woefully unprepared under RFK Jr. It's a tragedy and a preventable one.
And
Again, did these senators really believe what RFK said in, a few hours of a hearing, as opposed to what he's been saying for the last 10 years?
I know, it's ridiculous. And if you haven't watched our last episode, our interview with Renee DiResta, she's been studying him for almost 10 years now. And I recommend you all watch that because she had some things to say about him.
Which are horrific.
Yeah.
Every American should be frightened.
Yeah. Next question. Has Biden taken away any chance for Trump to seal the foreign policy success key from Gaza ceasefire/hostage release?
Yeah, probably, because that really was negotiated under Biden. So unless there's some additional breakthroughs, again, as you know, I don't like to project. I don't like to do hypotheticals. The devil is always in the details. But to this point, Trump has not secured that key.
$20 donation from President Belichick, our good friend.
One of our great presidents.
They say Democrats should recruit former federal workers to form a shadow government that actively exposes the corruption of Musk/Trump in real time, /use their talents to build online infrastructure and communicate with voters.
Couldn't agree more. I think that's a great suggestion. You have that in certain European countries with varying degrees of effectiveness. But, it's on fire now. Our country is on fire. And, any kind of anti-fire pre prevention to help it spreading and to put it out is sorely needed. And I do think a shadow cabinet would focus Democratic opposition to Trump, whereas now it's kind of, wouldn't you say, Sam, all over the map, but there's no focal point for it.
Yeah, it's not that good. I mean, there are some people in the Democratic world that I think are doing pretty well, like AOC,
AOC, yeah.
Jamie Raskin, who
Adam Schiff.
Adam Schiff's okay. Jasmine Crockett, I think, is another
Yeah,
one who
she's
does
very
pretty
good,
well.
right?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
overall, it's pretty messy. My question to you is, wouldn't that just set a precedent for, when a Democrat is in, for Republicans just to set up a shadow cabinet and
Right.
and
And what have I been saying for years? Democrats should
right.
never, ever act because they're worried about Republicans, what Republicans are going to do. That's a mistake Democrats have made time and time again. The most glaring, Merrick Garland sitting on his duff, delaying a special prosecutor because he was afraid that he'd be seen as political. And that started the whole sorry chain of events that led to Trump's second election.
I also think Sheldon Whitehouse has been doing pretty well too.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Chris Coons, Senator Coons is another one.
Yeah. All right, we have
But
700.
again, there's no focal point for it.
Yeah, we have 779 votes and we have 1,800 people watching. So if you're watching, we really want your feedback on this poll. This is a very
This is an
important poll.
important one because Sam and I disagree,
We
which is the first time in what, a
maybe
year and a half?
maybe not the first time, but it's definitely
A
maybe
fundamental disagreement,
right.
not on a minor
Yes, this
point.
is probably the biggest fundamental disagreement we've
Yeah.
had. All right. So if you haven't voted yet, please vote. Our next question is from Discord. If you want to join our Discord, the link to those are in the description of this video. This is from Pasta Guy. They say, Professor Lichtman, if Vivek Ramaswamy was the winner of the 24 election, do you think the United States would be worse off 4 years later compared to Trump? And would you have put some serious considerations in fleeing to Panama and starting a new life there?
I'm not going to Panama. I'll tell you that right now. But as you know, I don't like these hypotheticals because you never know. But I'll say this. It's hard to imagine what could be worse than Trump.
Yeah, for real. What are your thoughts on that Political article about economic data? If the people don't know, there was I sent this to you, Dad. There was a political
I read it.
Yeah, there's a political article about how the government is missing key filters or key sort of factors in their analysis of the economy, which made their economy seem better than it actually was.
I think there's truth to that. Again, I'm not an economist. I haven't done my own independent research on these numbers, but that article, which was by a pretty respectable group, was certainly worth considering. But I think, although the article mentioned this, it was kind of downplayed. And I think I said this last week, if I remember correctly, maybe not, that the biggest thing that all these statistics ignore, that it doesn't get reported, is the enormous transfer of wealth since 1989 from the bottom 99% of us to the top 1%. It amounted to some 13 trillion, not billion, 13 trillion dollars. And that is why all these other statistics do not have the proper context.
But I think this article is important too because people were saying that I think, people are arguing that you have to go off perception, right? But I think that's false because I think just our economic data needs to get better, right? People are saying people perceive the economy really bad. You need to fact that into your analysis. People might look to this article and say, "See, we were right," and I don't think they were right. I think we need better economic data.
I agree with that. And I think the key is to start taking into account what I see as, leave aside all the problems with Trump. This transcends Trump. The biggest problem in our economy, our society, our politics is the vast and increasing gap in income and wealth between the top 1% and the rest of us.
Right, but that's what this article was saying. Like certain factors like GDP, they used to be more reflective of the populace as a whole, but now the GDP is growing, but the percentage that is owned, there's a very small percentage that owns the vast majority of the
Yeah,
GDP
and
now.
that part of it I totally agree with.
Yeah. And if you're wondering, the article is a political article called Voters Were Right About the Economy. The Data Was Wrong. And it's by Eugene Ludwig, if you'd like to
I'm not
check it out.
endorsing the article because there's a lot of things in the article I don't agree with. Doesn't take into account the disinformation about the economy, which is equally important. But it does raise some important points, and I think by far and away, and I've said this long before that article came out, the big issue is this enormous wealth and income gap.
Right. All right. The poll doesn't seem to be moving very much. Oh, it moved by about 100. Do you want
All right,
another?
let's look at it.
They haven't shifted in a long time.
They usually don't shift a lot.
Yeah. 58% say yes, we should have Steve Bannon on the show.
Ah, see, I'm right. But by the way, I'd say there's only, a 25 to 30% chance he'd even agree to come on. It's not like if we try to get him, we're going to get him. I'd say the odds are against it, but I think we should try.
I might
And our
boycott.
viewers agree.
I might boycott the episode.
No, no, you can't do that. You can't embarrass your old dad.
All right, just for you, I won't. But
Thank you. It's worth it. All right, we got time for a few more questions.
all right, should I keep the poll up or should I just end it?
You can keep it up. Is
All right,
there any
yeah,
harm?
no. Another Discord.
Those donations coming.
Another Discord question from No Funhouse. They say, Professor, do you believe Musk is our number one national security threat? In fact, that he's not only has access, in the fact that he not only has access to our social security and national funds, but has recently pledged that his company Tesla will hold to China's socialist values. Do you believe we, the American people and government officials, are at risk of having our personal information given to China by Musk?
Absolutely. Musk has no principles, no morals. He'll do whatever he thinks will pad his bottom line. Trump said, oh, he doesn't really have any conflicts because he's so rich, it doesn't matter. What's the truth about rich people, Sam?
All they want is more money and more power.
Yes, they're never rich enough. I don't care if you're 1 billion or 400 billion or half a million. It's never enough because that's what their life is, acquiring money. So yes, I think Musk is a danger to our national security, but you know, it all comes down to Trump, who's, letting Musk run amok, and Trump himself, as we discussed extensively at the beginning of the show, is a clear and present danger to our national security.
I heard Congressman Robert Garcia, I think, sum up sort of the most clear explanation of why Musk and Trump are dismantling the federal government. Can I play that real quick? Do you mind?
Sure.
Okay, 1 second. Nobody could hear it. I just spent all that time. All right, whatever. Let's move on.
Can you summarize it?
Yes, essentially, he says that the reason why that they're cutting all this money and doing all this dismantling of the government is because they're essentially trying to raise funds to take this giant tax break to Congress. And they're going to use all these funds to create this massive tax break for the richest Americans. And the congressman calls it maybe the biggest attempt at redistribution of wealth in the history of the United States.
Right. It's already so badly distributed, and they're just going to make it worse. I posted on X and pointed that out. There are a couple of other reasons. They want to get rid of people so they can put in their own sycophants, their own loyalists, their own Hegseths and Bondis at lower levels of the government. And they also want to, for those who are not being replaced, they want them to be intimidated. They don't want any pushback from anyone in the government because they're all under the sort of Damocles of being fired. And they couldn't care less about the human costs of this. People who are losing their livelihoods. They're not 400 billionaires. They're people who live paycheck to paycheck. They can't afford to be fired from their jobs. There are people in dangerous situations abroad who are left in the lurch, don't have a place to go back. They couldn't care less about the human costs of what they're doing. And we really need to, spend a lot more time emphasizing that, it seems to me.
Yeah. Sorry about the video, folks. I just decided to do that on the fly. I didn't have it set up.
Point.
Yeah, and if you wanna watch the video, it's on my Blue Sky, which is at Sammy Licht. All right, what time is it?
You also can catch, it's on YouTube, my Cuomo appearance from last night.
Yes.
Just look up Lichtman Cuomo.
Lichtman Cuomo.
But don't read the trolls who are attacking me for a wig.
That's like Lichtman Cuomo is like New York City's best Irish Jewish law firm ever made, huh?
Pretty much, yeah.
This is from Obi Family. They say, "Hi guys, do you feel ex-presidents should be more vocal in condemning Trump's attempts to undermine our democracy? I'm sure it's not protocol, but protocol seems to have gone out the window."
Yeah, protocol in this administration, you've got to be kidding. This is the anti-protocol administration. Who is considered our greatest ex-president, Sam?
Living?
He's just recently not living.
Oh, Carter.
Jimmy Carter, by far. And he was very vocal in criticizing subsequent presidents, particularly George W. Bush. So absolutely, I think that's a very important role for ex-presidents, and I think that's a ridiculous protocol. Herbert Hoover constantly broke that protocol way back in the 1930s. So I don't know what the basis is for such a protocol. He constantly and viciously attacked his successor, Franklin Roosevelt.
Our next question is from Ben17624. They say, when it comes to your prediction last time, could it simply be that it doesn't count on the competitive primary key when the candidate is replaced and Ukraine was not a foreign policy victory? That would be 6 keys against the incumbent party.
I'm reconsidering, reevaluating the keys. I'm not willing yet to say what the problem was, other than to point out, yes, there was this unprecedented situation in the Democratic Party, made it very hard to evaluate, and 2, the unprecedented explosion of disinformation, which Rene DiResta talked about so brilliantly and so knowledgeably on our last show.
No doubt.
All right, it's 10 o'clock. We're about there.
Okay.
4 more questions.
Wow, that's 4 more?
4 more. I've got a jolt of energy.
That's a lot. This is from Peggy Cox. They say, do you think Trump will use the people rioting in the streets to get the militia involved and declare martial law? They're not really rioting, but...
Yeah, I put nothing past Trump. Nixon didn't quite do this, but he did plant people to make disruptions throughout the country not so he could declare martial law, but he could say, look, there are all these thugs violating our law. We need to restoration of law and order. So there is some precedent for it. A lot of precedents from Nixon to Trump.
Not good. Can Trump really bestow refugee status on Afrikaners in South Africa?
Possibly. I don't, I'm not a lawyer, and I know immigration law is a huge quagmire, but they don't seem to want to do it. They're just happy to get that recognition. As I said, you survey the whole world, all of these horrible places with, that people are in jeopardy of their lives from government thugs and drug cartels and gangs, and they don't deserve it. But by golly, it's those white people in South Africa who are, among the richest in South Africa who deserve refugee status. And of course, they told Trump to stuff it. We're not coming here as refugees, but we love the attention.
Mm.
I would be very curious to see.
Yeah.
And by the way, there's an organization called TRAC, TRAC, that follows immigration data. I think it's associated with University of Syracuse. And already the Trump administration is putting out inaccurate data about detentions and deportations. So I have no faith in anything they do, but I'd love to see how many white people are being detained and deported under Trump.
Will Social Security recipients see a delay in payments thanks to Doge?
Certainly possible. They want to muck around with Social Security. So yes, these are the people who fired those who keep our nuclear weapons safe. You can put nothing past them.
Right. All right, Dad, we're getting to our final question of the night, but I've got good news. Do you know what that good news is?
You're doing your after show.
The Lichtman Live post show is coming up right after this. The link, I'm posting the link right now in the chat. The link is also in the description of this video. I'm also on Twitch if you want to watch on Twitch.
Before we get to our final question, last check-in on the poll.
1,089 voters, and it's still at 58%.
Okay. Last question.
I ended the poll. All right, so
to keep it since we're about to end.
So that means you want our people to start reaching out to him and get him on the show?
Sure.
Okay.
You want to get Savannah on it.
Our last question is from Drokes2. They say, what are your projections for our savings and retirement if nobody wants to trade with America anymore?
I'm not an economist, and I don't like speculation and hypotheticals, but there's no question trade wars are terrible for the economy, and they're terrible for inflation. And as you know, if you're retired, particularly if you're on a fixed income, inflation, erodes what you have. Trump promised day one, right, Sam? What did he say was going to happen on day one or, right at the beginning of his administration?
I don't know. He said a bajillion things were going to happen.
Prices are going to start falling. Right. And what's happened with prices? They've been rising. And they're going, every economist says with these tariffs, they're going to rise more. So I'm not sure what I can, I'm not a financial advisor, but I can tell you there is a real question that Trump is only going to make inflation worse.
All right. With that, we will wrap up Lichtman Live for this day, February 18th, 2025. The Lichtman Live post show is coming up right after this, so make sure you check it out on my channel. I also want to announce that we're going to start posting on Saturdays some evergreen videos, Dad. Some topics that aren't from the show. Yeah, sort of more lecture-based stuff. Stuff that's maybe not so current event oriented. So make sure when you guys see those posted, you guys click those, you watch them, because that helps the algorithm a lot. They send out our videos first to our subscribers. So if you're subscribed, when they come out, you see it, click it, watch it. That'd be really helpful. And I think you guys will really like them as well.
Awesome.
I want to give a shout out to donations who didn't get on the show today. Mrs. Sparks Up, Comic Fan, CD, Limited Light, Max Pressman, Lexi Campbell, Toyota Corolla. I think Toyota Corolla did get on the show. Cynthia Fincher for Meta What, and Isaac Cannon. All right, Dad, what are your final words to the people tonight?
We are going to keep telling truth to power. I'm going to keep answering every one of your questions in a forthright way. But, we're in a five-alarm fire, unfortunately. And every voice that can be uplifted is incredibly important. Thank you all for watching and listening, and we will see you on Thursday.
Good night.
Good night.